Hi everyone and welcome to another segment of Chess Tips. My name is Charles Galofre, and for today's tip of the day we're going to talk about how with the pawn on e5, white must attack the king. So the game that we're going to take a look at today is a game between Nigel Short and Jan Timman, and this is a highly classical game. It's been heavily annotated and noted in chess literature, so you've probably seen it before. But the beauty of this game has a lot, it illustrates perfectly this theme or this topic of having to attack when you have a pawn on e5. And it's not necessarily always the case, but strategically and positionally it makes a lot of sense. The idea is credited to the late Alexander Alekhine, which obviously stated that a pawn on e5 gives white not only an incentive but a duty to go for the king. And the reason for this is that the pawn denies black the f6 square for the knight, and so often that means that f7 and h7 are squares that could be targeted by a knight move to g5, or by a bishop sacrifice on h7, or by a queen maneuver to h5. When the knight is denied the access to the f6 square, that means that the best defender of the black king is removed, and as a result, there are vulnerabilities in that area of the board. Something else that has been mentioned is that a pawn on e5 that is protected by another pawn also provides strategic benefits, and Petrov, the creator of the Petrov defense, said that when several pawns form a diagonal chain, one must always maintain the one that stands at the head. So what we're going to do today is that we're going to look at an illustrative example which shows both of these principles at hand, and we're going to explain a little bit as to the benefits of attacking with a pawn on e5. So the game started off by Short playing e4. Timman replied knight f6, the Alekhine defense, e5, knight d5, d4, and d6. And so now we see this position where white has a space advantage. He has a pawn in the 5th rank, and we're going to see how white overprotects that pawn to maintain his strategical superiority. So knight to f3, g6, bishop c4, knight b6, bishop b3, bishop b7, and now queen to e2, once again overprotecting the e5 pawn. Knight to c6, castles, and now h3, preventing white from playing bishop to g4, very important because the knight on f3 is a protector of the e5 square. a5, a4, preventing all form of counterplay, takes, knight d4, queen takes, and now rook to e1, once again overprotecting the pawn on e5. So e6, knight d2, it's a very good move, knight d5, knight f3, queen c5, and now try to see if you could identify the next move that white played. The move chosen by Short was queen to e4, and this is a perfect example, and you see this time and time again in these pawn structures when white has a pawn on e5, that typically a maneuver like queen to e4 is common, and redeploying the queen to the king side by playing queen to g4 or queen to h4. This is basically a common way of attacking this kingside pawn structure by black, but it's good to keep it in mind so that when you have this pawn structure in your games, you think of these plans of attacking on the king side by maneuvering your pieces over to that side of the board. So queen to b4, and now a very instructive move, bishop to c4, preventing the exchange of queens, the oversimplification, and also blockading the redeployment of the queen over to the king side. Knight b6 and b3. It doesn't matter if we're going to damage our pawn structure. What's important is that we're going to keep that strategical superiority in the center, and as a result, we're going to use we're going to bolster the pawn that's on e5, and we're going to use that as a point of attack towards the king. So knight takes bishop, pawn takes, rook to e8, and now rook to d1. A nice, a fine move, basically removing the rook from the attack of the queen, but also preventing black from developing the dark square bishop. And now white has the ability of moving the queen over to the king side. So queen c5, queen h4, b6, bishop b3, e3, queen e6, and bishop h6. And this is the standard way of attacking this kingside position. The idea is now to play knight to g5 and bishop takes g7, bishop h8, and now rook to d8. White basically has a bind in the dark squares. If you see all of white's pieces, the majority of white's pieces have influence in the dark squares, and that's the bishop that's basically trapped behind this pawn on e5. Excuse me. So bishop b7, rook a d1, bishop g7, rook a d7, rook f8, bishop takes, king takes, and now rook to d4. Now we enter a different phase of the attack, one where we're going to bring the last piece to checkmate the opponent's king, and we're going to see how instructive this maneuver is. Rook a to e8, queen f6 check, king g8, and h4. We're slowly bringing in more pieces towards the attack, and white will soon win the game. h5. Now you get to see what's the piece that was missing. King h2, rook c8, king g3, rook c8, king f4, bishop c8, and now king to g5. And black resigns because after bishop takes rook, white will play king to h6, and there's no way of stopping checkmate. So if you notice, white basically had a grip on the position by having a pawn on e5, overprotecting it, slowly maneuvering his pieces over to the king side, and maintaining all of black's attempts at simplification and counterplay at bay. This is a truly remarkable example of how you should attack when you have a pawn on e5.